Hello, story lovers! Tonight we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe. Share it with someone who loves a powerful love story. And tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. Asterisk, the elevator climbed 42 floors in silence, carrying Celeste Rivera toward a world that would never accept her. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel door's tired brown eyes. Hair pulled into a practical ponytail, uniform that marked her as invisible. The cleaning cart rattled softly beside her, filled with the tools of her trade and the weight of her buried dreams. At 24, she had learned that survival required sacrificing pieces of yourself until only the essential remained. 3 years of scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans had taught her to move like a ghost through marble corridors where million-dollar decisions were made by people who wouldn't remember her name. The executive floor smelled of expensive coffee and fresh flowers, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic sting of her cleaning supplies. Through floor-toozling windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly. A city of possibilities she could only observe from the margins. "Morning, Celeste." Miguel Santos looked up from his security desk, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile. "You're here early again. Couldn't sleep." She managed a tired smile. "How's Isabella doing with her math homework?" "Thanks to your help, she's actually excited about algebra now." "I don't know how you do it, because I used to dream of teaching it in a lecture hall instead of explaining it in basement break rooms," she thought, but didn't say. Instead, she squeezed his shoulder. "She's brilliant. She just needed someone to believe in her." The conference room on the 42nd floor was her first stop, where yesterday's strategic meetings left behind scattered papers and the lingering tension of high-stakes decisions. As Celeste moved methodically around the massive oak table, her eyes caught the quarterly financial projections spread across the polished surface. Old habits died hard. Despite 3 years of forced invisibility, her mind still processed numbers with the precision of her abandoned business degree. The calculations swam before her, elegant in their complexity but flawed in their execution. A miscalculation in the debt-to-equity ratio that would cascade through the entire model, potentially costing millions. Her hand trembled as she reached for a pen. Who was she to question the work of analysts who earned more in bonuses than she made in years? But the numbers didn't lie, and her conscience wouldn't let her walk away from such a critical error. She scribbled her correction on a sticky note, her handwriting careful and precise, then placed it gently on top of the report. Maybe someone would notice. Maybe someone would care. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the morning stillness like broken glass. Celeste spun around to find Regina Hartwell standing in the doorway, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to execution. Everything about the woman screamed privilege, from her platinum hairstyle to perfection, to the diamond bracelet that probably cost more than Celeste's annual salary. "I was just cleaning, Miss Hartwell." Celeste's voice came out smaller than she intended, her body instinctively shrinking under Regina's predatory gaze. "Cleaning doesn't involve touching confidential documents." Regina snatched the note from the table, her manicured fingers scanning Celeste's careful analysis. "What is this garbage? Some little cleaning girl thinks she understands corporate finance." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to remind Celeste of her place in the carefully constructed hierarchy of this glass tower. But beneath the humiliation, something else stirred. A flicker of the person she used to be, before desperation had forced her to accept invisibility as the price of survival. "I noticed an error in the calculations," Celeste said quietly, her voice steady despite the fire in her cheeks. "I thought someone should know." Regina's laugh was crystalline and cruel, echoing off the windows that showcased a world neither of them truly belonged to. Regina, despite her connections, was still just playing in importance while Celeste had earned her intelligence through years of sacrifice. "Listen carefully, little maid. Your job is to push a mop and empty trash cans. Leave the thinking to people who actually matter." Regina crumpled the note with deliberate slowness, savoring each wrinkle as she destroyed hours of careful analysis. Now get back to scrubbing toilets where you belong." The words landed with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave scars. Celeste felt something break inside her chest, a fragment of hope she hadn't realized she was still carrying. She gathered her supplies with mechanical movements, her dignity intact, but her spirit bleeding. What neither woman knew was that Jonathan Blackwood stood in his private office behind tinted glass, close enough to witness every moment of the exchange. The CEO watched Celeste's quiet grace under fire, saw the intelligence burning in her eyes even as she submitted to humiliation. But most importantly, he saw Regina's cruelty for what it was, the desperate performance of someone who had never earned anything through merit. As Celeste disappeared down the hallway, her cleaning cart rattling like chains, Jonathan quietly retrieved the crumpled note from the trash. His hand smoothed the paper carefully, reverence in the gesture as he read her neat handwriting. The number stared back at him, elegant and absolutely correct. For the first time in years, Jonathan Blackwood felt the stirrings of something he thought he'd lost forever. Genuine curiosity about another human being. 3 weeks passed like scenes from a film Jonathan couldn't stop watching. He found himself arriving earlier each morning, positioning himself where he could observe the cleaning woman who had casually solved $1 million problem while being torn down by a socialite with nothing but connections and cruelty. Celeste Rivera moved through his world like a ghost with substance, her presence both invisible and impossible to ignore. He watched her help struggling employees with their computers during her breaks, explaining complex software issues with the patience of a born teacher. He saw her eat lunch alone in the basement cafeteria, business journals salvaged from recycling bins spread before her like maps to a country she was forbidden to enter. The woman was a walking contradiction. Her worn sneakers carried her through marble halls with quiet dignity. Her tired eyes held depths of intelligence that most of his executives lacked. She treated everyone from security guards to senior analysts with the same respectful kindness, while they treated her like furniture with a pulse. Jonathan had built his fortune on reading people, on understanding the stories they told themselves and the truths they tried to hide. But Celeste Rivera was a mystery that grew more compelling with each observed moment. On a Wednesday evening, when the building had emptied of all but the most obsessive workaholics, Jonathan found himself wrestling with the Morrison merger analysis that had consumed his last 3 weeks. The numbers swam before his eyes, complex web of valuations and projections that seemed to shift every time he thought he had them pinned down. The soft sound of cleaning supplies being arranged outside his office made him look up. Through the glass partition, he could see Celeste organizing her cart, moving with the efficiency of someone who had perfected every motion to conserve energy and time. She knocked softly on his doorframe, and when he looked up, her dark eyes held a mix of determination and fear that he recognized in his own mirror some mornings. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Blackwood. I couldn't help but notice you're working late on the Morrison analysis." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. How did a cleaning woman know about confidential merger documents? Why did her voice carry the cadence of someone accustomed to boardroom discussions rather than basement break rooms? What about it? His voice came out sharper than intended, the automatic defense of a man who had learned to guard his vulnerabilities behind walls of professional distance. "I think you might be overcomplicating the valuation model." The words tumbled out of her in a rush, as if she knew she had seconds before common sense told her to retreat. "If you restructure the debt analysis using a modified DCF approach, it would give you a clearer picture of the actual value." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Jonathan stared at this woman in a janitor's uniform who had just referenced advanced financial theory with the casual confidence of someone who breathed corporate strategy. "Who exactly are you?" The question came out raw, stripped of corporate politeness and professional facades. "Celeste Rivera, sir. I cleaned the executive floors," but something in her posture had shifted. A straightening of shoulders that suggested there was more to that answer, layers of story she wasn't ready to share. "And you understand merger valuations?" Color flooded her cheeks, turning her exhaustion into something that looked almost like shame. "I studied business in college before I had to leave. I've kept up with financial theory in my spare time. The admission hung between them like a confession, both of them understanding that this moment was a crossing of lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Jonathan gestured to the chair across from his desk, a simple movement that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Show me." For the next hour, Celeste Rivera transformed before his eyes. Gone was the invisible woman who pushed a mop through his world. In her place sat someone who saw patterns and connections that had eluded him and his team for weeks. Her explanations were brilliant and precise, her insights cutting through complexity with elegant simplicity. She leaned forward as she spoke, her exhaustion forgotten in the rush of intellectual engagement. Her hands moved as she explained concepts, tracing formulas in the air with fingers that were calloused from manual labor, but moved with the grace of someone born to shape ideas rather than scrub floors. When she finished, Jonathan sat back in his leather chair, feeling like a man who had just watched magic performed in his own office. The merger analysis that had consumed weeks of work from highly paid analysts lay solved before him. Restructured by a woman his company paid minimum wage to empty trash cans. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice carrying a wonder he hadn't felt since childhood. "You just solved a problem my team has been wrestling with for weeks." Celeste's smile was shy but genuine, transforming her tired face into something radiant. "It's just a different way of looking at the numbers." "Why are you cleaning offices?" The question escaped him before he could soften it with diplomacy. "You should be running a department, not emptying wastebaskets." The transformation was immediate and devastating. The brilliant woman who had just revolutionized his thinking crumpled inward, her shoulders curving as if protecting herself from a physical blow. The light went out of her eyes, replaced by something that looked like grief. "Life doesn't always give us choices, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice carried the weight of sacrifices he couldn't imagine. "Sometimes survival means accepting what's available, not what you deserve." She gathered her supplies quickly, the spell broken by his thoughtless question. As she reached the door, she turned back, her expression unreadable. "My mother needs her medication, and bills don't wait for dreams to come true. This job pays what I need it to pay." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Jonathan alone with spreadsheets that would change his company's future and questions about a woman who was reshaping his understanding of intelligence, sacrifice, and the stories people tell themselves to survive. In the silence of his office, surrounded by the fruits of her brilliant mind, Jonathan Blackwood realized he was in danger of something he'd sworn off years ago. It's actually caring about another human being's story. The Morrison merger closed successfully 3 days later, generating $40 million more in value than Jonathan's original projections. He stood in his office, watching the news reports celebrate his brilliant strategic insight, while knowing the truth sat 42 floors below him, probably eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag. Celeste had avoided the executive floor since their late-night encounter, sending other cleaners to handle his wing. The absence felt like a missing piece in his daily routine, a reminder of how completely she had appended his carefully ordered world with 1 hour of conversation. Jonathan Blackwood had built his fortune on decisive action, on seeing opportunities others missed and seizing them before doubt could interfere. But this situation required a delicacy he wasn't sure he possessed. How do you offer to change someone's entire life when you barely understand your own motives? He found her during lunch break in the basement cafeteria, sitting alone at a corner table with a financial journal spread beside her sandwich. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under her eyes, but she was absorbed in an article about emerging market derivatives, her pen taking notes in margins like a graduate student preparing for exams she'd never take. "Mind if I join you?" He gestured to the empty chair across from her, his voice carefully casual despite the way his heart hammered against his ribs. Celeste looked up, startled. Several other employees glanced their way, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. CEOs didn't eat in basement cafeterias. They especially didn't sit with cleaning staff in full view of the company rumor mill. "Mr. Blackwood, you shouldn't." She started to gather her papers, her movements quick and nervous. "People will talk. Let them." He sat down before she could object. His expensive suit, a stark contrast to the industrial furniture and vending machine ambience. "I have a proposition for you." The word proposition hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that made Celeste's cheeks flush. She set down her sandwich and studied his face, looking for clues about his intentions. I'm listening. I want to offer you a position. Senior financial analyst reporting directly to me. Starting salary, $120,000, full benefits. Education reimbursement if you want to finish your degree. The numbers hit her like physical force. $120,000, more than triple her current income. Enough to pay for her mother's medication without working double shifts. Enough to maybe, someday, dream again. Why? The question came out strangled, barely a whisper. You don't know anything about me except that I can spot a miscalculation. Jonathan leaned forward, his green eyes intense with something that looked like hunger, but felt different, more complicated. I've been watching you for weeks. You help people solve problems they can't figure out alone. You treat everyone with respect, regardless of their position. You've kept yourself educated despite having every excuse to give up. And your mind, he paused, searching for words. Your mind sees patterns that my highest paid analysts miss. I don't have the credentials. I never finished college. I don't even own a proper business suit. The protests tumbled out of her. Each one a defense against hope that felt too dangerous to entertain. Credentials can be earned. Suits can be bought. But intelligence like yours can't be taught? His voice dropped lower, more intimate. I'm not offering charity, Celeste. I'm offering you a chance to use your gifts instead of hiding them behind a mop bucket. She stared at him across the scarred table. This powerful man who was offering to transform her life with a simple yes. But Celeste Rivera had learned that nothing came without a price, especially gifts from men who held all the power. What do you want in return? The question held layers of meaning they both understood but couldn't acknowledge. In a basement cafeteria, surrounded by curious coworkers, I want your mind working for my company instead of being wasted scrubbing floors. I want your insights on every major decision. I want to see what happens when genuine intelligence is given the platform it deserves. And personally. She held his gaze, refusing to let him hide behind corporate speak. What do you want from me personally? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he wrestled with an honesty that could destroy the careful boundaries of a professional offer. I want to know your story. I want to understand how someone with your mind ended up invisible in plain sight. He stopped, the admission too dangerous to complete in public. You want what, Mr. Blackwood? I want to know what it feels like to have a conversation with someone who isn't trying to impress me or use me for connections. I want to remember what it's like to be surprised by another person's thoughts. His voice carried a loneliness that made her chest ache. I want to not eat lunch alone anymore. The vulnerability in his admission cracked something open inside her chest. This man who commanded boardrooms and controlled millions of dollars was confessing to the same isolation she felt every day. But where her invisibility was imposed by circumstance, it seemed self-constructed. A wall built from too much power and too much disappointment in human nature. If I say yes, she said slowly, everything changes. I can't go back to being invisible. Regina Hartwell and others like her will see me as a threat instead of just ignoring me. Are you prepared for that level of office politics? Jonathan's smile was sharp, predatory in a way that reminded her this man hadn't built an empire by being nice. Regina Hartwell is about to learn what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. As for office politics, let me worry about managing the people who work for me. Celeste looked down at her hands. Calloused from 3 years of manual labor, but steady despite the magnitude of the decision before her. She thought of her mother, taking medications they could barely afford. She thought of her abandoned textbooks, gathering dust in a storage unit she couldn't afford to keep much longer. She thought of 3 years of dreams deferred and intelligence denied. I need time to think. Of course, Jonathan stood, his corporate composure sliding back into place like armor. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. As he walked away, leaving her alone with the remains of her sandwich and a financial journal that suddenly felt like prophecy instead of fantasy, Celeste realized that accepting his offer would mean more than changing jobs. It would mean stepping into a world where she would have to be visible, powerful, and vulnerable all at once. where her intelligence would be an asset instead of a secret shame, where Jonathan Blackwood's interest in her mind might evolve into something far more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. The question wasn't whether she was qualified for the position. The question was whether she was brave enough to find out who she could become if she stopped hiding. 6 weeks after accepting Jonathan's offer, Celeste Rivera walked through the executive floors as if she belonged there. Her new business suits an armor of respectability that still felt foreign against her skin. The transformation had been swift and merciless, from invisible to indispensable in the span of a month. Her insights reshaping quarterly, projections and investment strategies with surgical precision. But success had painted a target on her back. She's sleeping with him. Regina. Hartwell's voice carried clearly through the conference room door as Celeste approached with the quarterly reports Jonathan had requested. There's no other explanation for how a cleaning lady becomes senior analyst overnight. Come on. Regina, David Chen, one of the junior executives, sounded uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Have you seen her work? She restructured the entire Morrison valuation. That's not something you do with sexual favors. Please. Regina's laugh was crystalline and cruel. Men like Jonathan Blackwood don't promote women for their minds. Trust me, I know how this world works. Celeste's hand froze on the door handle, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew this moment would come, and prepared for it during sleepless nights when doubt crept in like poison. But hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like being flayed alive. Even if that were true, came another voice she recognized as Marcus Webb from accounting. What does it matter? Her projections have been flawless. The company's earning millions more because of her insights. It matters because it makes a mockery of everyone who earned their position legitimately. Regina's voice grew sharper, more venomous. I have an MBA from Wharton. I've worked in finance for 5 years. But some little janitor who caught the CEO's eye gets handed a 6-figure salary? It's insulting. Celeste pushed through the door, her chin raised and her expression carefully neutral despite the acid burning in her stomach. The conversation died abruptly. 5 faces turning toward her with expressions ranging from embarrassment to defiance. The Morrison projections you requested. Mr. Blackwood asked me to distribute them for final review. Her voice remained steady, professional, giving no indication she'd heard anything beyond business discussions. But Regina Hartwell had never learned the art of strategic retreat. Celeste, perfect timing. We were just discussing your meteoric rise in the company. Regina's smile was sweet poison, designed to look friendly to anyone not versed in corporate warfare. David was wondering how someone transitions from custodial work to senior financial analysis so quickly. I told him you must be incredibly talented. The word talented dripped with insinuation. Each syllable, a carefully crafted weapon designed to reduce 6 weeks of brilliant work to something sordid and unearned. Celeste set the reports on the conference table with deliberate precision, her movements controlled despite the rage building in her chest like a thunderstorm. Talent is certainly part of it, she replied, her tone conversational. Along with 3 years of business education, 5 years of practical experience managing complex financial situations, and the ability to spot patterns that others miss. She turned to face Regina directly, her dark eyes calm and steady. But you're right about one thing. It does take a special kind of talent to earn respect in a field where people assume your success must be sexual rather than intellectual. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge that left no room for retreat or misinterpretation. Regina's perfect composure cracked slightly, her smile becoming more forced. I didn't mean to imply, of course you did. Celeste's voice remained level. Something dangerous had entered her tone. You meant to imply exactly what you said? The question is whether you're brave enough to repeat those implications to Mr. Blackwood's face when he arrives in 5 minutes for this meeting. The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic. David Chen studied his hands with sudden fascination, while Marcus Webb found something incredibly interesting about his coffee cup. Regina's face cycled through several expressions before settling on a mask of professional innocence. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding at all. Jonathan's voice cut through the tension like a blade, cold and sharp enough to draw blood. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his presence filling the room with barely contained authority. "Mr. Blackwood," Regina's voice pitched higher with nervous energy. I heard what you were just doing." Jonathan stepped into the room, his green eyes scanning each face before settling on Regina with the focus of a predator selecting prey. "You were questioning the legitimacy of Ms. Rivera's promotion based on assumptions that say more about your own character than hers." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Even David Chen, who had tried to defend Celeste, looked like he wanted to disappear through the marble floor. "Regina, our services are no longer required at Blackwood Industries. Security will escort you out within the hour." Jonathan's voice carried the finality of an executioner's blade. "You can't fire me." Regina's composure shattered completely, revealing the desperate cruelty beneath her polished exterior. "My father sits on your board of directors? Your father sits on my board because I allow it. Just as you worked here because I allowed it." Jonathan's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. "Both of those allowances have just been revoked. You have 59 minutes to clean out your office." As Regina fled the conference room, her heels clicking against the marble like a frantic countdown, Jonathan turned his attention. "To the remaining employees, let me be absolutely clear too. Everyone in this room, and anyone else who might be confused about Ms. Rivera's qualifications," his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Her promotion was based entirely on merit. Her insights have earned this company millions of dollars. Her work is flawless, and her value to this organization is beyond question." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room like a blanket of unbreachable truth. "If anyone else has concerns about Ms. Rivera's qualifications or the legitimacy of her position, I encourage you to present them to me directly. I assure you the conversation will be memorable." The meeting proceeded with clinical efficiency, but Celeste barely heard the discussion of quarterly projections and market analyses. She felt exposed, raw, as if Jonathan's defense of her had stripped away protective layers she didn't know she'd been wearing. After the others filed out, she remained seated, staring at the report she'd prepared with such care while her mind wrestled with emotions she couldn't name. "You didn't need to do that," she said quietly, not looking at him. "Yes, I did." Jonathan loosened his tie. The first crack in his corporate armor since entering the room. "Regina Hartwell is poison. She's been spreading rumors about us since the day I promoted you. About us." Celeste looked up, her heart stuttering at the way he said those two words. "There is no us, Jonathan. You gave me a job." That's where this begins and ends. The silence that followed felt like a live wire, crackling with electricity neither of them was willing to acknowledge. "Is it?" His voice dropped to something almost intimate, dangerous in its honesty. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like considerably more than that." Celeste stood abruptly, gathering her papers with shaking hands. Don't make this something it isn't. You saved me from cleaning toilets. I've helped your company make money. That's a business transaction, not a romance novel. Then why do you stay late to discuss strategy when you could go home at 5? Why do you laugh at my jokes in a way that has nothing to do with my position as CEO? Why do you look at me like you're seeing something other people miss? Each question hit like a physical blow, stripping away the professional distance she'd tried to maintain between them. The truth was, she did see something others missed, the loneliness that matched her own. An intelligence, hungry for genuine connection. A man who had built walls so high, he'd forgotten how to let anyone close enough to matter. "Because I'm grateful." She lied, the words bitter on her tongue. "Because you changed my life. I don't want to disappoint you." Gratitude doesn't explain the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Jonathan moved closer. Close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "It doesn't explain why my heart races when you walk into a room, or why I've started making excuses to work late just so we can be alone together." The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and dangerous and impossible to take back. Jonathan. Her voice came out strangled. Barely audible. Tell me you don't feel it too? His hand reached toward her face, stopping just short of touching her skin. Tell me I'm imagining this connection between us, and I'll never mention it again. Celeste closed her eyes, feeling herself standing at the edge of a cliff she'd been approaching for weeks. Below lay the unknown dangerous, thrilling, and possibly devastating. Behind lay the safe path of professional distance and carefully guarded emotions. When she opened her eyes, Jonathan was watching her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. I feel it, she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep in her chest. God help me, I feel it too. The space between them collapsed like a dying star, his hands framing her face as if she were something precious and fragile. His thumb traced her cheekbone with reverent gentleness, and for one perfect moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the impossible thing growing between them. Then his phone buzzed with an urgent message that would shatter everything they thought they knew about trust, betrayal, and the price of letting someone see your heart. The message on Jonathan's phone came from his head of security, marked urgent and containing 3 words that changed everything. Background check complete. Celeste felt him tense against her, saw something shift in his expression as he read the screen. The warmth in his eyes cooled to something approaching suspicion, and she stepped back instinctively, already knowing that whatever he'd learned would destroy the fragile trust they'd built. Is there something you haven't told me about your past? His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the edge of betrayal beneath the professional tone. What did they find? Her heart hammered against her ribs as every worst-case scenario flashed through her mind. The bankruptcy, when her mother got sick. The student loan she'd defaulted on. The 3 months when she'd worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the report. They found Elena Rivera, your mother. She died 8 months ago from complications related to diabetes. The words hit her like a physical blow, forcing the air from her lungs. She gripped the edge of the conference table for support, her knuckles white against the polished wood. The medical bills you've been paying? The medication you said she needs? According to this, those expenses stopped 8 months ago when she passed away. His voice held a dangerous quiet, the calm before a storm that would level everything in its path. So tell me, Celeste, if your mother is dead, what exactly have you been doing with the money from your new salary? The question hung between them like an accusation, heavy with the implication that everything she'd told him was a lie designed to manipulate his sympathy. You had me investigated. Her voice came out flat, empty of the emotion that was threatening to tear her apart from the inside. I investigate everyone in positions of financial responsibility. It's standard procedure, but his tone suggested it had been anything but standard. This had been personal, driven by feelings he was now questioning. Celeste closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a secret she'd carried alone for 8 months crushing down on her shoulders. The truth was more complicated than Jonathan's report could capture. It's more painful than she'd been willing to admit to herself. She died in my arms, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. At home, because she refused to go back to the hospital, she said she'd rather die in her own bed than rack up more bills I couldn't pay. Jonathan's expression softened slightly, but the suspicion remained. That doesn't explain why you lied about the medical expenses. I didn't lie. Celeste opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly despite the tears threatening to spill. I've been paying off her medical debt. $60,000 in hospital bills, medication costs, specialist fees. The collection agencies don't care that she's dead, they still want their money. The silence that followed felt like eternity. Jonathan stared at her, processing the implications of what she'd just revealed. She hadn't been manipulating his sympathy with a fictional sick mother. She'd been carrying the crushing weight of medical debt from a woman who had died in poverty despite her daughter's desperate efforts to save her. Why didn't you tell me the truth? His voice was gentler now, still guarded, because grief isn't a qualification for promotion. Celeste's composure finally cracked, years of suppressed pain bleeding through her professional facade. Because I needed you to see my mind, not my tragedy. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you offering me the job out of pity instead of respect. Jonathan set his phone aside, his hands trembling slightly as the magnitude of his misunderstanding settled over him like a weight. Celeste. I know. She held up a hand to stop him, her voice gaining strength as righteous anger replaced hurt. You want to know what I've been doing with my salary? I've been paying off medical debt that should have been covered by insurance but wasn't, because the system is designed to bankrupt people for having the audacity to get sick. I've been sending money to Isabella Santos for her college fund because Miguel's daughter deserves. It's better than watching her father work security for 20 years just to afford textbooks. I've been putting aside money to finish my degree because I promised my mother I would before she died. Each revelation hit Jonathan like a physical blow, dismantling his assumptions and replacing them with a truth that made his chest ache with something approaching shame. But mostly Celeste continued, her voice breaking with the force of emotions too long suppressed. I've been trying to figure out how to live with the guilt of knowing that all the intelligence you value so much couldn't save the person I loved most in the world. That I can solve million-dollar merger problems, but I couldn't solve the problem of keeping my mother alive. The words hung in the air between them, raw and devastating in their honesty. Jonathan felt something crack open in his chest as he watched this brilliant, strong woman finally allow herself to be vulnerable in front of another human being. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, meaningless in the face of the pain he'd just forced her to relive. I'm so incredibly sorry, are you? Celeste wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Smearing mascara she couldn't afford to replace, but had worn anyway because looking professional had become a form of armor. Or are you sorry you got caught making assumptions about someone you claim to care about? The question cut deeper than any boardroom negotiation ever had. Jonathan realized he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just their relationship, but the kind of man he chose to be when faced with his own capacity for causing pain. I'm sorry I investigated. You like a business liability instead of trusting? You like a human being. His voice carried the weight of genuine regret. I'm sorry I let my past experiences with people who wanted to use me make me suspicious. Someone who's never asked me for anything. And I'm sorry that my first instinct was to doubt your integrity instead of recognizing that your actions have shown me more about your character than any. Celeste studied his face, looking for the sincerity behind his words. What she saw there was a man confronting his own capacity for inflicting unintentional cruelty, wrestling with the recognition that power without empathy was just sophisticated brutality. Your mother would be proud of you, Jonathan said quietly. Not just because of your professional success, but because you've carried her memory by helping other people the way you wished someone could have helped her. The simple statement broke something loose in Celeste's chest, unleashing grief she'd held at bay for 8 months while she focused on survival and advancement. She sobbed once, a sound that contained multitudes of loss and love and exhaustion. Jonathan closed the distance between them, pulling her against his chest with a gentleness that acknowledged her pain without trying to fix it. She let herself lean into his strength for the first time since her mother's death, allowed herself to be held without having to perform competence or gratitude in return. I don't know how to do this, she whispered against his shirt, her voice muffled but honest. I don't know how to trust someone with my heart when I've spent so long protecting. Neither do Juanhe's arms tightened around her, his own confession as raw as hers. I've built my whole life around control and distance. But being with you makes me want to try being brave enough for connection instead of just success. They held each other in the conference room where she'd first been humiliated, where he'd defended her, where they'd finally admitted the feelings that had been growing between them like something inevitable and terrifying. What happens now? Celeste asked, pulling back to look at his face. Now we figure out what it looks like to build something real together. Jonathan's smile was tentative but genuine. The expression of a man willing to risk his carefully constructed walls for the possibility of authentic love. No more investigations. No more assumptions. Just two people who see each other clearly and choose to stay anyway. Celeste reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with wonder. I choose to stay. Even though I'm emotionally unavailable and terrible at trusting people, even though I'm still paying off medical debt and don't know how to let anyone take care of me." They smiled at each other across the space between damaged and hopeful. Two people who had found something worth the risk of being known completely. Outside the conference room windows, Manhattan glittered with the lights of 8 million people pursuing their own versions of happiness. But inside, two unlikely souls had discovered that sometimes the most profound transformations begin not with grand gestures or perfect timing, but with the simple courage to be honest about who you are and what you need. 6 months later, Celeste would finish her MBA with Jonathan cheering from the audience. A year after that, she would be promoted to CFO. Her insights and integrity making Blackwood Industries one of the most respected companies in the city. But in this moment, in a conference room that had witnessed cruelty and kindness, betrayal and forgiveness, they simply held each other and marveled at how love could grow in the most unlikely soil when tended by two people brave enough to trust in tomorrow. The end.